Thank you so much, Cornelia, and welcome again for those who've seen me in the morning. So, the battlefield of the 21st century is the human mind, This is exactly, when I came to learn about neurotechnologies about a good year ago, it frightened the hell out of me, because this is why we're having this panel, and this is why we have this great panel. And I'd like to ask great panelists on stage, Alexandra Duca, Jean-Marc Rickli, and Wenzel Mehnert. Wenzel, who was so kind, I met him this morning in Spittelau, and because Matthias Kettemann, my big partner in crime, with whom I cooperate in digital technologies, he was supposed to be here with us, was sick. Wenzel courageously and spontaneously agreed to come by. Thanks a lot. So let's. You give me the middle? No, I don't like the middle. I get here so I can better oversee you. So let's get right to the heart of the matter. So let me first start with introducing our eminent panelists. I start with, it doesn't really make a difference, Jean-Marc Rickli, who joins us from Geneva. Jean-Marc is the head of Global and Emerging Risk and the founder and director of the Polymath Initiative, very important polymath capabilities, at the Geneva Center for Security Policy in Geneva, Switzerland. He also is the co-chair of the Partnership for Peace Consortium, Emerging Security Challenges, working group, and the co-curator of the International Security Map of the Strategic Intelligence Platform of the World Economic Forum. And there's so much more to add. You're a prolific writer and all the rest. But the last one, just to make some personal adds, your latest book you published is entitled Surrogate Warfare, The Transformation of War in the 21st Century, for everyone to read or to give away for Christmas. That's the perfect Christmas present. Wenzel, I should have started with the lady, but with Wenzel. Wenzel is a foresight expert at the Austrian Institute of Technology, and we work a lot on neurotechnology together. You work a lot on futures and imagining futures for new and emerging technologies, and you deal a lot with the convergence of, you're on the quantum circles, in the AI, neurotech, you're everywhere. Thanks very much for coming. Alexandra Duca is from works with the Federal Ministry of Defense and is an international lawyer. She specializes on the international law aspects of new and emerging technologies, particularly AI, but also cyber and outer space. And she is obviously going in and out in the multilateral circles in Geneva, New York, and Vienna, and holds frequently lectures all over the place. And then, thanks very much for coming too. And then, Guilherme, you've not been yet properly introduced, other than head of neuropsychology. But Guilherme is also my partner in crime when it comes, or my go-to person for neurotechnology. He's been the author of a very, very important study that was commissioned by the European Parliament, and he's assembled a really great interdisciplinary team. And Guilherme and I, we were just in Paris a couple of weeks ago, negotiating on the UNESCO recommendation on ethics of neurotechnology. So with that, let's jump into the issue. So, shall we start? Guilherme, you talked a bit about this, dual-use dilemmas. Can we dive a bit deeper and you can unpack them? And I'd like to also touch a bit more on the human enhancement bit. And maybe, I don't know if we've got some time, the problem with neurodata and how you see it.
Yes, there are several dilemmas there. So for the functioning neurotechnologies, so you have different degrees of precision these technologies may achieve. So if you achieve the highest level of precision, so the amount and quality of information you can get about single individuals is unimaginably high. But in other technologies which are less precise, you can still feed data banks with that and still also improve the quality of decisions of recommender systems, and so there are many ways so to incorporate neurodata in manipulation and surveillance systems. So in a level of effectiveness so much higher than what is already known to most of us. But there is also another side, so the anticipations of risks of technologies. So the neurotechnologies don't need necessarily to be effective to already produce an impact on us. And so, so we can induce defectism regarding what the future reserves for us. So if everybody already counts with that everybody will be implanted in a few years, so then so the ways to fight against that so will be rather limited in comparison with another scenario where so we may choose freely, or we may even choose to forbid that for non-health related purposes. The dual use risk, yes. So this permeates the whole developments of neurotechnology. So there is a huge gray zone between what is purely enhancement and what is purely health-related technologies.
Exactly. You're going to come to that health, non-health separation because, sorry to interrupt, but we should make that clear. Neurotechnology has very much legitimate use in the health sector, and we are talking very much about the non-health applications.
Precisely. So strategically, if you want to push for the development of neurotechnologies, not with the interests of people in the first place, but the interest of further development of technologies in the foreground. So you may use this gray zone to push if you need. So if you fear military applications, so then you have a justification to make more invasive research on health as well, and the other way around. So you have a big playground, so to use a strategy, so to push for technologies which otherwise people will not be happy about. Yes.
Thank you very much. We're going to maybe now talk a bit more about cognitive warfare and national security risks, strategic stability, and what neurotechnology applications can do if they get in the wrong hands. Jean-Marc, you've been doing a lot of work on this.
Yes, thank you first for the invitation. And I had to fight to get this these slides on. But the point is, when I was in the military, you know, my instructor used to tell me, pictures is worth 1,000 words. And my job basically is to look at the dark side of the force. So imagining how technology can be misused. So the way I do it is I look at where we come from, where we are, and where we might go. And when it comes to cognitive warfare, I will define the term in a minute. But we start to see development different technologies that are very at enabling cognitive warfare. So here, this is a technology that is behind deepfake that was invented in 2014. And this is GAN's generative adversarial network. So you can see how fast this technology has evolved. In 4 years, it was possible to create pictures that look really realistic. By 2022, when you ask people to assess where they have more trust in real picture or in deepfakes, they come up with preference for deepfakes. And the issue with deepfake is that there is a psychological asymmetry in us human beings, which is that we tend to give more power to lies than truth. Lies spread faster and reach a wider audience than truth. And that is, if you want, a condition of human beings. But now we have created a technology that basically stimulates this thing. And so as time passes, what we start to see is that, for instance, in these recent studies, it shows that the persuasive power of algorithm, you know, in different settings. And what was interesting in this one is that even taking an LLM that is built with security in mind, like Claude, if asked to deceive humans, it does it. And it does it in a way that is very, very powerful. Now, if we look at what we see now, the war in Gaza, for instance, and you might have seen these memes, so these are pictures that represent a specific situation, you know, that Hamas used paragliders to attack the kibbutz around Gaza. Okay, this one is not really problematic. Now, if you look at this one, which is more realistic, and if you look at the shape of the smoke, what do you see? You see the face of Adolf Hitler, you know? And can you see it? No?
Maybe the angle.
All right, so, I don't know. Yeah, so you have the ears, you have the eyes, and then the nose, and I could show later. But the point here is that it's not swaying public opinion, but what this thing is doing is undermine trust in information. And then when you present true evidence of, for instance, human remains that were found in kibbutz around Gaza, then people say, well, you know, that doesn't exist. So in the latest report of the EAS on foreign information manipulation interference that was published last March, they monitor basically disinformation operation in Europe, and 3/4 are actually done by not the US, by Russia. In the future it could change, and 1/4 by China. Now, if we look at neurotechnologies and not just LLMs, we start to see interesting development in commercial wearables. Last year, you might have seen that Apple released Apple Vision Pro, which allows you to enter a metaverse. And in Apple Vision Pro, you have eye tracker. Now, if you start to pair this thing with earbuds like this one that can monitor your emotional state, you start to have information that we don't have yet, which is how a specific person reacts to external stimuli. Now, fast forward, this is basically what you could do here. Apple, 3 years ago, submitted this patent with different neurosensors. So get ready to have this kind of devices hitting the market. 2 weeks ago, Apple announced that they partnered with Synchron. Synchron is a neurotech company that is using BCI, but unlike Neuralink's company, they are invasive but not opening your skulls. They do it through with stents, so through the vein system. And so what they will do here, which is fantastic in terms of application, the idea is to allow people which are disabled to connect with Apple devices. But what you see starting here, you see to start to have a company that is now basically starting to have access to that kind of data. Therefore, if we look forward in the future, well, we should start really thinking about, you know, when we generate this data, what could happen? You know, that's why we should really start to think about protecting privacy. Now I come to cognitive warfare. It's different from disinformation. Disinformation is part of it, but it's broader than that, because cognitive warfare is about controlling how and what people think in order to control how they act. And it has to do with disinformation, but with neurotechnologies and wearables, it could actually go much deeper into directly interacting with your brain. Just 2 years ago, I wrote a paper that we should really start thinking very carefully, similar to what we did during the 50s and 60s with arms control agreement to regulate the arms race, now to come up with a not arms control agreement, but subversion control agreement. Why? Because if we start to see the state of democracies, and here you can see how in 20 years public opinions on democracies have swayed in Western democracy, you can see that it's quite alarming, you know. And I think we should really read Hannah Arendt, what she's in the 70s, you know. The issue with a population that is lied upon is not that it doesn't lie. It doesn't believe in specific thing. Is that at one point these people don't believe in anything. And with such people, you can do basically whatever you want. So we should now think in the third or fourth category of WMDs. After weapons of mass disinformation, we should think about weapons of mass disinformation, because this has a potential to completely change. We're talking about strategic stability. If you want to undermine a democracy, do not hit the military, because the center of gravity of democracies is the social contract between the citizen and the government. And this social contract relies on trust. So if you want to undermine democracy, what you do, you attack trust, and you attack trust by waging cognitive warfare.
Exactly. And because you mentioned the need to regulate, you mentioned sort of, how did you call it, a cognitive security convention? No.
No, subversion control.
A subversion control convention.
Yeah, exactly.
So we are deep into the international law field, which gives me a good bridge to talk a bit about the legal frameworks. And Alexandra is working exactly on that. So within the war or armed conflict area, we are obviously in the international humanitarian law business, but also human rights that apply, obviously. So could you give us an overview of, because what we heard is extremely scary, right, in the military domain. Before even one shot has been done, a war could already been, very much dominated by these new tools. So what do we have in place in terms of existing legal norms that could protect us? Because I think Jean-Marc made the case very strongly. And also Guilherme, who said we need to protect our cognitive integrity and our autonomy. So what is there? Maybe you can help us unpack this a bit.
Yes, I will try my best. So I want to start by saying that we actually have very comprehensive and robust legal frameworks in place that were indeed not specifically designed for, but certainly also apply to the use of new or persuasive technologies, if you want. In order to assess how, we need to clarify two things in advance. Firstly, what kind of strategic situation are we in? Is it wartime? Is it peacetime? Because depending on the answer to this question, different legal frameworks will apply. So in peacetime, we look at domestic law, we look at international human rights law, and in armed conflict, we primarily look at international humanitarian law, IHL. And secondly, what is it precisely that we want to assess? Because we have heard a couple of definitions of cognitive warfare and persuasive technologies, and what they have in common is that they are very broad. They refer to a variety of activities. Similarly, AI, autonomy, neurotechnologies are tools or features that can be used in very different ways for very different purposes. So one might be perfectly lawful while the other one is not. So we need to clarify that. And how do we approach that, both in times of armed conflict and in peacetime? And I will start with armed conflict. And I already mentioned IHL is applicable in armed conflict, including to the use of new technologies. And that is indisputable because the International Court of Justice already in 1986 clarified and confirmed that IHL is applicable to all kinds of warfare and all kinds of weapons, those of the past, the present, and the future. And the way IHL is structured is that we, on the one hand, have regulations that deal with the weapon system itself, meaning that it looks at whether that weapon system is indiscriminate, does it cause superfluous injury, unnecessary suffering. And on the other hand, we have the rules that govern the conduct of hostilities. So what we would call the targeting law, including the principle of distinction, proportionality, precautions in attack. And all of these rules apply regardless of the technological sophistication of the weapons or the means and methods of warfare that are being used. So when we talk about, for instance, when we talk about methods of warfare, and here I think of information and psychological operations that also fall under the umbrella of cognitive warfare. Here we have regulations in place already that partly restrict those operations and prohibit them. So we have to always look at the foreseeable outcomes of such an operation at the intent. So for instance, if you have a psychological operation that aims at inciting violence among the civilian population, that intends to get people to kill each other, that is certainly prohibited already. Similarly, if you conduct an operation that the primary purpose of which is to spread terror amongst the civilian population, that again is explicitly prohibited. So we already have some regulations here. And what I also want to stress at this point is that states under existing IHL have an obligation to conduct tests to assess in the study, development, acquisition, and adoption of new weapon systems or means and methods of warfare, whether or not that weapon system or that method of warfare is lawful under IHL in some or all circumstances. And if the answer to this question is no, then that system cannot be used by the armed forces. Outside of armed conflict, I already mentioned the primary body of international law that guarantees certain rights to individuals is international human rights law. And here we have regional differences because we have a lot of regional instruments that regulate human rights law. But rights guaranteed to European citizens, for instance, include inviolability of human dignity, the protection of personal data, the right to privacy, the right to respect for physical and mental integrity. So we already have a provision explicitly that states that the mental integrity of an individual is to be protected. So also in the human rights area, that is a body of law that has been carefully drafted and developed by states over decades. And I believe that we need to be careful here not to attempt to duplicate the law because that is a procedure that is prone to chaos and uncertainty. If you have two regulations in place for the same issue, which one are you going to adhere to? Which one is going to be the standard? And this could even lead to, us going into the opposite direction, to lowering the protection provided by human rights law. So what can we then do? So what I wanted to stress in the first place is that a lot of the things we fear are already prohibited by law in some kind of way, which certainly does not mean that we already have an answer to every question. That is certainly not the case, quite on the contrary. International law has always been a body of law that's highly dynamic. It has always evolved and developed over time, and I believe it will do the same here. But how would you assess if you need something new and what it is if you do not look first at what you already have? So in terms of the law, I believe that states need to first analyze what they already have and then start from there and build upon that.
Well, that's a real interesting question. And I wonder whether you could also delve into it after we talked maybe about the futures discussion, or maybe we touch upon this first and then we go to Wenzel. Because you're absolutely right, there is a body of law out there, in particular human rights law. We've talked a lot about, the capacity of all these technologies to manipulate the mind. So it's the core of privacy. The right to privacy, at least how we understand it in Europe, includes mental privacy, so everything inside, but also obviously privacy externally, if you like. It has quite a lot of dimensions. We had this discussion in Paris, and the same discussion takes place in Geneva in the Human Rights Council. Whether neurotechnologies is something new and is not covered by existing law or not. Jean-Marc was arguing a bit when it comes to cognitive warfare that we need even stronger regulation. You were talking about a convention, which scares the hell out of a diplomat in these days because it's so impossible to get to any form of multilateral understanding in the form of a convention these days. Shall we go back to that question? Are we protected enough? Are we understanding the risks and the implications well enough to have that kind of legal protection?
Just to answer your question, I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot give an informed judgment about that. But I'm not calling for a convention, but I'm calling to raise awareness about the principle of subversion. Because when it comes to the law of war, we focus on this idea of destruction. All right, a weapon kills. Now, the example that we had from this the researcher from ASPI is very interesting, because here you have tools now that allows to profile very accurately specific people, and then you can basically try to neutralize these people. It has nothing to do with a weapon.
Yeah.
All right. but it might have to do with your ability to exert free will. Okay, and here I think we are crossing a boundary where certainly if you do it at the individual level, it doesn't have an impact. But now if you scale up at a population level, that's a different story. If you are able, the example was good, to actually neutralize people that are staging protest by first nudging, oh wow, my watch tells me that I'm super stressed, I have to rest. So you eliminate parts of the protester. And then for those who are actually more resisting to that, then you start to send really specific targeted messages so that you neutralize them. Here we're getting closer to coercion. Yeah. The question is really, how do you assess that? How do you spot that? Subversion is very, very difficult to spot. It's not like dropping a bomb on a crowd of civilians. All right, it's much more difficult.
And the problem, of course, is, it sounds what we've got very easy if in a clear setting, like in an armed conflict setting, where the rules are very clear and very strict. But these kind of examples are hybrid threats. They go they have this not clear boundaries, which makes it so difficult. Maybe getting back now to Wenzel, who looks at this from a foresight perspective.
Yes.
So tell us, what kind of methods do you do that bring us some more insight in understanding the risks but also potential? Because what I don't want to do is, we talk a lot about the dark side. But maybe also the positive potential. How do we leverage the positive? Because there is a lot of positive potential. We should not totally leave you in the dark about it. Alzheimer, a lot of mental health illness, physical disabilities. Yeah. Lots of good things out there. But the problem is the non-health area or the non-therapeutic area. We had lots of discussion on this. So please, Vincent.
Okay, I will try to give you an insight into how I approach this topic, and I'm talking in particular about neurotechnology, but also about the larger discourse that we have here at the stake. So the field I'm working in is called future studies, also foresight sometimes, but the difference between those two fields is that while foresight tries to look into the future, future studies rather looks at futures. So what I'm interested in is how we articulate images of the future and what kind of discussions we currently have, and also what kind of imaginaries we attribute or narratives we use to talk about certain technologies. This morning I've been in a panel on a conference by the European Technology Assessment Community, and we had a panel on the topic of hype. Hype is a topic that is often coming with emerging technologies, like for example neurotechnologies. That's an important cultural phenomenon, you can say, because it helps to foster, it helps to fund, it helps to innovate certain technologies. It's necessary, otherwise technological innovation in our age of today will not be happening. Hype has two ways. One way goes into something that we call over-promising. The other way goes into fear-mongering and creating anxiety. With neurotech, we are somewhere in between. On the one hand, we see for some years now visions, for example, from at that time the company Meta, Facebook, now Meta. We had a talk by Regina Dugan, who was telling about that you can use in the future, you can use neurotechnologies to faster write your messages directly from your brain into your smartphone. Or we see Elon Musk, who goes on stage and says, with neurotechnologies, what you can do is you can upload your memories into a robot. So clearly coming with fictional tropes from science fiction, but it helps to hype the technology and to create more awareness around it. On the other hand, we also have those fear-mongering visions, I would call them, like that neurotechnologies, when we would all implement them and when we would all run around with those devices, we would create, or we have a big problem with our mind and our privacy of the mind. What we can see with those narratives is, and this is an approach that I like to take, is that I take apart the narrative and I say, okay, the one is the technology, so we're talking about neurotechnologies, and the other one is the implication it allegedly has on society. So we can, for example, say that this technology might cause problems with our privacy, and it might know information about us that can use against us to manipulate us. This is a discourse we already have, and this is a problem that we already have. It's called social media. We have all those problems that we discuss with neurotechnology already today, but when we talk about neurotechnologies, we can kind of lean back on that and say, well, this is a problem we have in the future. Unfortunately not. Unfortunately, it's already a problem we have today, and we need to address it today. We can say that, and this is also a common argument, that neurotechnologies might be used to manipulate us and that influences our way of voting. We already have that. Again, it's called social media. We see that with Elon Musk, again, using X, for example, as a communication platform to heavily influence what kind of messages get heard and what kind of messages do not get heard, to support political ideas all over the world and to push heavily into right-wing governments, and thus also undermine democratic structures. These are all problems we already have today. Again, they come up as a fear with neurotech, but we already have them here today. And if this is going to happen with neurotech or not, this is a totally different question. Because what we can also say about neurotechnology, and then now I'm looking at not at the idea of the social attribution and also of the social impact that we attribute to this technology, but I would rather look at the technology itself, and here in particular about invasive technologies, but also non-invasive technologies. These technologies are so sensitive and so sensible that it is way, way away from what functions we attribute to these technologies. So just to give you an example, if you would have the idea of Neuralink, that you have a chip in your brain with electrodes going deep and stimulating certain areas of your brain, this might work for a certain amount of time, but latest after 2 or 3 months, the neurons and the electrons, they just move and they're not located anymore at the same precise position where they are, because, well, we as human bodies, we move and we shake our heads. And also the brain is constantly reshaping itself. Thus, the electrodes might work at the beginning because they can stimulate a certain area of your brain that you want to be stimulated for some reasons, maybe to get dopamine kicks. But then again, you could also use Instagram, which is, again, social media, so the function is already here, or something else. The problem with these technologies is they are so unstable that most of those fears that we attribute to them, they will not hold because the technology itself is not promising to do that. Coming back to Regina Dugan, the representative from Facebook, this vision that she had that we can use basically telepathy through neurotechnology is something that is not going to happen because the technology cannot do it. Still, we attribute this vision and we have this hope to the technology.
I think that's very interesting because that's something that Guillermo is working a lot on neural myths and neuroenchantment. And it comes back to something we discussed in the workshop after lunch on narratives and how they shape the way we think now. Guillermo, I'd like to unpack a bit of your insights and research on the hype. And where do you see really the real risks? Because it's very difficult to discern, there's lots of hype out there, what potential hype, what could be done, and what cannot be done. But we have also learned a lot is already out there, It's not so fictional that you have earbuds that, measure constantly your neural data and infer cognitive and mental states. And the potential for manipulation is big. So can you unpack a bit the problem of neuromyth and neuroenchantment and where we really should have our eye on?
Yes, there is a big gap between what existing technologies are capable of and how they are presented to the public. And so they are fed by our expectations, so most of it is culturally determined. So modern society, so we praise the brain as the materialization of ourself and so who we are as human persons. So the brain takes then the place of the human person in this perspective. And so what the machines can measure from the brain activity, it can be hemodynamics, it can be electrical activity, is then what we consider to be ourselves. And so many of the existing brain-computer interfaces, so they can distinguish a few different states, so you can separate with appropriate statistics. And they are more or less associated with the subjective feelings of particularly emotions. Not all the spectrum of emotions we can feel, but a few we can discriminate. And by using these brain-computer interfaces, so we are reframing, because as soon as people start using these brain-computer interfaces and build a community, and there are already communities of people using ears, which represent your emotions for a long time now, it changes the way people interpret and interact with their own emotions. So they start classifying it in another way. So in a impoverished way in this case, because we have more than 4 different emotions. So this is an example. So where the reach of the implications of the use of technology go much further than what it promised to be. So as a toy. So this is an example. Another point is what we call neurotechnologies nowadays. So it's a very broad definition. So most of it is actually behavioral data. So we look at, so there are many different proxy variables you can use to infer about mental activity. So among them...
And it's again social media?
Yes. Among them also real brain activation patterns. Yes. Most of these systems which are non-invasive, so they are presented as highly precise, but actually, they are not that stable, and so they do not produce, do not give you back everything what you expect. But still, so the hopes are so high that it doesn't matter at the end. So we find a way to rationalize on that. So it's quite easy to convince people that neurotechnologies are highly efficient and that can do much more than what they actually do. So there are experiments on that. So where you just put people on a big hair dryer and ask them to see a few images. And you tell them, because you are reading the reflection in their pupils, so that they are seeing this and that with some mistakes, but not too many. And everybody believes that this is true. So, and this is also used to propagate the culture around the neurotechnologies. And this serves as a function which goes, of course, beyond the neurotechnology. So it's an instrument for many different things. So among other things, I appreciate very much what Jean-Marc said about the subversion. Neurotechnologies are a very good instrument for that, because they don't even need to be very precise, to produce magnificent effects. So for the control of behavior, because they have a firm grip on our expectations, so they are very, very useful. And if they have some precision at all, so they are feeding other more complex systems where you combine different technologies with the neurotechnologies, and then you have a very strong machinery for behavior control and social influence.
So how can we? This is really scary, right? This is extremely scary. How can we protect ourselves? What can we do? Go ahead.
No, I just wanted, it's a panel, so you need to have a bit of disagreement, and in a panel is always boring. And I would like to push back on what Wenzel said. He's totally right. I think when he says that the current state of development in neurotech, the picture of the scenario of having a device that will control what a specific person thinks is out of scope. I mean, you were mentioning the example of BCI. It moved that happened to Neuralink, the first patient that they implemented. The electrodes moved and they had some problems. Fully agree with that. It doesn't mean that in the future it might not happen. That's That's one thing. Now, but the argument is not about that. My argument is rather about we should always think in functions. Okay, what kind of function does a specific technology achieve? You know, I'm a pilot, and when I fly my plane, I do not flap my wings, but I can fly. All right. So if more than a century ago, your model of flying was a bird, you know, the way planes are built, the physics is the same as the bird, but it does it for different ways. Though now you have drones that are flapping the wings. And my point here is that there might be ways. It's like an algorithm. Okay, we say algorithms are stupid. That is correct. But increasingly, algorithms are cramming more and more functions. Now, when you have an algorithm that, for instance, an example I always take is high-frequency trading. Okay, once we started to introduce high-frequency algorithm on trading floor, suddenly the trader was competing with an algorithm that was working 10 to 1 million times faster than he is. So basically, you have a machine that competes with a specific function. Doesn't mean that this algorithm is able to identify a flower or whatever. Now, the question that you have to look at is really about the functions that the specific technology is addressing. And as Guillermo said, a third point is that it's not because the technology does not exactly work as we are working, because when you ask neuroscientists about controlling the brain, they will tell you, well, we don't even know how the brain functions, so how do you want it to control it? But a technology doesn't have to be 100% of the time accurate. And I take the example, I worked a lot on terrorism, you know. And I remember I spent a summer in Silicon Valley in 2010, and I met people at Facebook, and I asked them at the time, do you have anyone working in your company about the socio-political implication of a technology? They look at me and said, what are you talking about? Fast forward 2014, you have one organization, the Islamic State, that basically was the first organization to understand how to weaponize social media by using the virality of social media with pictures of decapitation and mass killing. And this had an enormous impact. So the question here was not that it worked 100% of the time, you know, but it was good enough to create an effect. And my worry with this technology is that we will develop this technology for good because there are lots of positive implications, but they are dual use. And the same technology can be misused, and it doesn't have to be 100% of the time. If you could use 10% of the potential of this technology, you could actually have an effect that is negative. So my point here is not to ban research on this, of course not, but is to think about how this technology could be misused in order to steer development that will guarantee that we use this technology for the best they can do and try to avoid possible malicious uses and negative implications.
It's basically what we're trying to do when we talk about anticipatory governance, or what Bethany talked about, how do we escape the Coleridge dilemma? We need to be sort of not ahead of the curve, but at least try to be cognizant of potential risks. And as you say, mitigate the risk, prevent harm, but leverage the positive. Shall we maybe, Wenzel, you want to reply to that, and Guillermo, or shall we talk a bit more about human enhancement issues? And
I can reply to that, but I would also like to connect what you said earlier, namely that there are already certain laws in place to prevent certain what you call functions. I would probably call them societal implications. And to that, I will make a little turnaround here. I think the problem with with every emerging technology is that we do not know what the application, I think this would be the term that I would use instead of function, what the application would be. I mean, we can say, for example, in the field of quantum computing, we can say, oh, those devices will make calculation and everything way more efficient and way more better. So then we have way less energy that we need to navigate aerospace, for example. But this is an application that is loaded with a lot of wishes and with a lot of hope, and we never know if this is going to be real. If you're talking to physicists from the field of quantum technology, they will tell you is what quantum technology does is it tells you more about quantum technology. And this is like a very easy answer, but this is what it is. It tells you more about the field that it is working in. What the same thing what neurotechnology does is it tells you more about neuroscience, and it tells you more about the functioning of the brain. This is what we can say for sure. Every application that comes afterwards is, at the current state, loaded with a lot of hope and with a lot of imagination, right, and also with a lot of longing for that we want something. And then the same goes for the risks. And here, I wanted to come back to what you said before, namely that we have laws that go against, I think, manipulation, you said before. But then with the cases of Cambridge Analytica, for example, we have a clear case of how technology is going against those laws, where we have clear cases of how technology is manipulating people, so which would actually be against the law. Then we have examples from ChatGPT, for example, at the moment, where we clearly say that using training data is against the law of copyright, where we have different nation states that now go against copyright and saying, okay, we have to find a way around copyright so that we can support the promises and the application and the imaginations that come with this technology. So this is a weird turnaround of technology development, right? It feels like in the name of technological progress, we are actually cutting short on the rights that we as society built up over the past 100 years or even longer.
Yeah, if I quickly may reply to this point, that is certainly true, and that we've been witnessing lately. But here's the point: from a legal perspective, the prerequisite for international law to work and to function is that states apply it in good faith. And if states do not apply it in good faith, then the law, I do not want to say it's useless, but it's kind of, it doesn't, the circle doesn't close. And that's the problem also with new legislation or new law, because if you have states that do not adhere to the existing law, if you would make new law, what good would that bring? Because you would have the same problem again, right? So the issue here, I think, is that also because you've mentioned the areas of application that might not be quite clear for the legal assessment, that is something essential, because you need to know what the function is. You need to know what the effects are, or could be, in order to know what you would actually like to regulate. And here, of course, there might be scenarios where you have law in place and then you kind of notice over time that there are actually functions that might not be governed, or you would need additional regulation or at least clarification on how you could fill that gap. And here I want to mention that new legislation or new treaties is not the only option we have. We also have a lot of soft law instruments that have proved to be very effective in the past, that proved to be very powerful tools. Also maybe as an intermediary step to a potential new treaty at some point, because as you pointed out correctly, we all know geopolitical situation is very difficult right now, and the likelihood that we're going to have a new universal treaty anytime soon is very low, quite frankly. So especially then, or having that in mind, we need to look at what we already have and try to apply that as much as possible and to clarify that as much as possible.
I think you made an important point. And Guillermo, you step in, please.
May I also comment on that? And so 2 points, actually. The first one is, so digital technologies have this property, so they are transgressive, so you never know in which context so they want to be applied, and so they mess up with many of our traditional categories. So you mentioned earlier, so there are laws for wartime and laws for peacetime. So are we at war? So is cognitive war going on right now? So how to make these decisions? So it's definitely not trivial.
This distinction. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so which mechanisms can we think of so to overcome that? Because so the technology, so they just come with this property added to them, so this transgressiveness. And if I also may, so not to lose the connection to what Jean-Marc said before, so the power of images. So there is a reason why in many cultures, in many traditions, so you're not allowed to make images of humans, of people, just because so they are convincing in themselves. And so the level of precision and so narrative expression we achieve nowadays, so to make photos or movies or even so whole narratives, so with high literary or text qualities added so to what is being presented. This is already out there. So there was this example of a fake letter, the dictator of Burkina Faso wrote to the Pope, and apparently there was also another video with the response by the Pope. Everything was fake. It was pretty convincing. And so after seeing that and recognizing, I watched both of them, and so experienced that everything is fake, but still some of the arguments were really powerful. And so emotionally, so they let a trace I cannot erase, so it's not as easy. And so images have this power. So let's just think of the worst nightmares we had in our lives. So they were full of images. So images which move us in a very deep way. Also, so our deepest positive desires, so they also are full of these images. And so with some algorithm and so this nice technology, so to make it visible, you can manipulate people as you want. So this is just fantastic. And so with so the power so to generate that en masse, of course, so we have powerful weapons at our disposal. Yes, and so this everything. Thanks.
If I may quickly respond to the question of the threshold between peace and war, because we often hear that there's some kind of gray zone, and that we, these suggestions that we would be in a state of constant war fighting in a hybrid form.
Indeed, that's the hybrid
yes.
threat conception.
Yes, exactly. And, from a legal point of view, we have these two states. And the distinction between them is very important. Because when you are in an armed conflict or war, the consequences, which I feel like is often forgotten, the consequences that the members of the armed forces are allowed to target enemy forces, and they're allowed to be targeted. And the Ministry of Defense is a legitimate target. And of course, you need to adhere to the other rules of IHL, proportionality and precautions, warnings if possible, and so on. But it's a very severe state to be in, and states, usually are very careful to declare. It's not usual anymore to declare war, but to admit that they are in a state of war. And for the legal assessment, we have the armed attack on a state that could, entitle a state to the right to self-defense, and then could trigger an armed conflict and would lead to IHL being applicable. And that armed attack, discussions have started with the cyber domain, because the cyber attacks are also, they are not kinetic, but they could cause kinetic effects, ultimately. They could cause death of people and injury to people and damage to objects. So here it was kind of that switch of states to adopt the effects-based approach and to not look that much at weapons being used and kinetic means, but to look more at the effects in the end, because you can also cause kinetic effects with cyber means, for instance. So we witnessed a kind of a shift in interpretation of that notion of armed conflict in states. And as I already said, international law is a highly dynamic body. It evolves, it develops. Also, the interpretations of states of certain existing norms could develop over time. And yes.
Well, I think that's the hybridness of this thing is so difficult. And we see that with cybersecurity, with cyber attacks as well, the problem of attribution. There's a bit of resistance. I think it's going to be very difficult also to, this. If we think about neurotech and sort of as persuasive technologies used for subversion, very difficult not only to, well, the problem of attribution I think will be extremely difficult. And I wonder still what you said back then, some sort of an international agreement of reining it in. How do you see that really, if we look at the current landscape, what would be the interest of states to do so? And where do you see this discussion going in the circles? Because most of these discussions are not taking place in the disarmament or arms control circles. They are not yet really fully out. It's a very specialized debate. We're just starting it. I think in the gaming industry, they were talking about this already for 10 years ago, but it's not a broader circle. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I want to make a point. On the one hand, the paper was about the international community come up with a subversion control agreement or a discussion on this. On the other hand, I wanted also to make the point that we are here discussing how law, international law could deal with that. But at the same time, what we're witnessing is that increasingly what we built in terms of tools to limit the effect of warfare is being dismantled. And the latest example is what you see with the landmine treaty. Some states basically ratify them, and when you're a small state and you have a very long boundary with your neighbor, the only way to protect it is by using landmines, and they retreat they withdraw from this treaty. So law is a tool; it's a very important tool, but you also have to see the limitation of it. And so it's not because we have laws that we will be protected, and because we see also that there are lots of violations of it. So you also need to think in that space in a much wider term. And the much wider terms are how you protect against that. It's about building up resilience. Now think about the youngest generation. I was reading the other day a study that said what teenagers in France spend 4.5 hours per day watching videos. Now, if now you come up with immersive technologies that will mimic games ecosystem. So for these young people to transition from games to goggles will be completely natural. Now think about someone who spends 8-10 hours in a virtual enhanced environment. How do you relate to your friends, to your parents? Look at already what we start witnessing in younger generation in terms of critical thinking, the ability to read. Now, I give classes in university, and I've been doing an exercise for the last 20 years. I give students a book, and the assignment is they have to summarize the book in one sentence. And you were talking about addiction before. When you scroll on social media, and you have videos that last 30 to 2 minutes, and suddenly you have to sit and read a book for 10 hours without your brain being stimulated. That's for these younger generations something that has become really, really difficult. So we're losing some cognitive abilities. And so the question is, how can we deal with that? And we don't know yet what will happen when we have more and more immersive technology. What will we lose? We might win in terms of some cognitive abilities, but what we're witnessing rather is that we see that the level of anxieties among the youngest generation students is increasing. There was reading a study where the youngest generation in the US, they can no longer go and in restaurants because they fear the interaction with the waiter when they have to order. You know, so these are new problems, and the issue here is that the way we consume information is very different. Okay, we are still reading books, we are still reading traditional newspaper, but the youngest generation is all about influencers, and maybe the next generation will be all about immersive technologies. So you have to address that problem in very different ways. That's for building resilience. Then you have the other issues, which has to do with when we are building these technologies, we need to put some safeguards. You know, and this is where basically governance comes into it, and you were mentioning soft law. That's very important to get the industry in so that we are able to build devices that we will be able to reduce the negative impact. And my last point is that also it's a failure of imagination. You can build technologies for good, and I always take this example. If you take blockchain and cryptography, two technologies that were built for good. Blockchain, what it does, it removes intermediaries between sellers and buyers. You can sell a higher price, you can buy at a lower price, which is good. And you take cryptography, which is essential for guaranteeing transaction online. Now, if you combine the two, what do you get? You get ransomware. Because the ransomware will basically lock your computer, which is based on cryptography, and to unlock your computer, what do? You basically pay a ransom in a cryptocurrency which relies on blockchain. And so here what you can see is the combinatorial impacts of this technology, and it's impossible to think about all the possible impacts. So the issue here is, at one point with some of this technology, we have to embed in this technology safeguards. And in some of this technology, we have to even think about kill switches. And here I'm talking more in terms of synthetic biology in combination with AI, because here you can get to really, really nasty scenarios.
What you said about the young generation is quite interesting, because Guillaume and I were just talking about a recent book that came out, and it's just available only in French, where it theorizes a bit about this hyper-personalized situation, which is also quite scary. But I'm looking at the watch, is that 6 minutes, 25 seconds left? Because I'd like to open up the discussion also to our audience, and give our audience the opportunity to use this extremely rich expertise that is in front of you. Any questions at this point? Shall I give you a couple of minutes? It's been quite a lot of information. Yes, wonderful. Microphone's coming along.
Very quickly, together with building the safeguards in the technology, is there any way to make sure that if there's evidence of massive damage on a vulnerable sector, if these companies will respond? Basically, if we can, I know that because of trade secrets and many other things, we cannot know what's going on, but we can document the damage. But similarly, what happened with asbestos and many other toxic things, who's going to foot the bill? Society again? Or can we, this time, design a way that they have to be insured or something if massive damage happens?
Guillaume, you would like to take up that point, that question? Because I know that you gave quite a lot of thinking on the issue of accountability and the problem of what you do when one of these companies goes broke.
Yes,
and do you have such a device in your brain?
A horrible example. So when a company selling bionic eyes goes bankrupt, so who is responsible for the maintenance, updates, and also the support of the patients? Yes, so in this case there was nobody. So it happened in a country without health insurance as a fundamental prerogative, so as being a citizen. Yes, it can be again, can happen again and again with new technologies as well. So. And also all the problems related to fusions and transmission of data. Yes, so there is a big gray zone, so where you can always sneak out of your responsibility if you want to. Yes. So it's about regulation. So perhaps you're better informed.
Yes.
You wanted to say something too, Alessandra?
Yes,
please go
I
ahead.
can jump in. So maybe from an international law perspective, we have state responsibility. So if those technologies are used, by the government, and something goes wrong, so there is, in legal terms, we would say there's an internationally wrongful act. For example, that government uses that technology to influence the population of another state, to mess with to conduct a disinformation campaign because there are elections in due time. And in international law, we have the principle of non-intervention, which means that a state is not allowed to intervene in the internal or external affairs of another state. And if he still does it, it's an internationally wrongful act, and the state can be held accountable for that internationally wrongful act. And that victim state can also take countermeasures, non-forcible of course, but countermeasures to stop that conduct by that state that is in violation of international law. And in armed conflict, when we have IHL that is applicable, we always have the commander that is responsible, because IHL is directed at persons. It always starts with those who plan or decide upon an attack. So the commander needs to make sure that he and his subordinates both comply with IHL, the way it currently stands. So there are different approaches as to how you can make sure this happens with AI-enabled systems, with autonomous weapon systems, for instance. So, there are different approaches here, whether you need a direct manipulation or an operational framework. But in the end, it's the commander who's going to be responsible. And it will be his interest that he knows exactly what is going on, that he knows exactly how the technology that he uses works. Because in the end, if there's going to be a violation of law, he's the one who's going to be charged.
I wanted to go back to the Collingridge dilemma that we heard earlier. Namely, it says that early on in the development of a technology, we still have the capability of changing it. Later on, it will be too costly, so we cannot do it. What we are seeing now is there is a weird turnaround of that. So, to give the example, the AI Act tried to regulate the development of AI. We are now at the moment where the tech companies become so powerful that there are probably, maybe it's going to turn out soon, pushing the AI Act away. Sorry, lacking the term here. We saw something else also recently, that Microsoft, where most of the ministries and also all institutions running on Microsoft, used its power to block the email access of an employer at the in Den Haag, what is it?
The ICC.
ICC, yes. Because he pressed charges against Benjamin Netanyahu.
He's the prosecutor.
The prosecutor, yes. So we see here the tech companies now also getting involved in politics all of a sudden, which is a very, very scary scenario. And I think the problem that we have is that we are at the moment where those tech companies become too powerful, and here I'm just repeating the words of Joe Biden, that we need to be aware of that and find ways how to regulate that better, although our regulation hands are kind of tight. But to end on this, I'm channeling Matthias Kettemann now, who I just heard yesterday or the day before talking about quantum technologies. I would say we failed with AI, but we do not, and we should not, and we cannot fail on neurotechnologies and quantum technologies. So we need to go forward with regulations and find application use cases, anticipate them and regulate them.
And be aware of the risks, anticipate risks, and make sure that when we come back to the narratives, have enough information that we don't get swayed or overwhelmed by narratives of others. You mentioned basically Cambridge Analytica earlier and said basically all the laws are there, but they're useless. Well, nobody enforced them. Why? Well, also because we are, I think, overwhelmed by narratives, and it's also myths. There's too strong, you cannot do anything against it. The development is so fast paced. Governments cannot follow suit the quick, so there's no need to regulate. I think that's also regulatory capture rhetoric, and we have to be very aware of these myths because there's a very big intention behind it. And again, anticipatory governance. We are in control of our future and the images of our future. Any further question? Because I'm already over time. I think we have to wrap up. But please do ask, come back bilaterally or at another time. I think we're going to continue the conversation. I'd like to really thank you very much, all of you, for coming out here and enriching us with your knowledge and your insights. And let's keep thinking, anticipating, and discussing. There are lots of scary things, but we can master them. Thanks a lot.